Rudy is a stupid and ugly loser who gets reincarnated in the body of a baby with addiction to huge melons. He is reborn with the ability to learn powerful magic and makes a harem for himself. Unfortunately, he can't explore his fantasies because his magnum doesn't let him before he was reborn. A group of policemen rush to an accident scene to find an ugly-ass fatty who was just hit by a truck. While being taken to a hospital, he hears some voices around him. Even at the brink of death, all the dumbhead could think about was the fact that he wishes he had lost his virginity before he died. Shortly after, the dummy wakes up to find himself amidst three strange faces, who look at him like they're about to eat him up. Just then, he realizes that they are speaking a totally different language, and imagines that this could be the death of Hades. Immediately, the man amongst them kisses him and carries him, making him wonder how this is possible since he is a full-grown fatsie. Looking around, he sees a beautiful woman with delightfully huge melons, which gives him a different goal in life: to make sure he touches it.
Really, nigga?
While trying to do so, the idiot realizes that his hands are the size of his sausage, and this freaks him out. This causes him to figure out that he has been reincarnated into the body of a baby, and the names of his parents are Paul and Zenith. Even after realizing this, he isn't so shocked, and finds himself being jealous of his new parents, since they have a life his loser self never had. Also, he happened to be older than them, as he was 34 before he got here, which made them more like teenagers to him. He, however, consoles himself with the fact that Zenith's succulent melons are all his, even though he didn't seem to be turned on by them while sucking. This causes him to conclude that he must have felt that way because she is his mother. The couple named the baby Rudius, and since it was so weird, it got shortened to Rudy. As the months went by, Rudy began to understand the language and got to know more about his parents. Even as a child, his pervy instincts remain as he takes the underwear belonging to the family's maid, Lilia, and uses it as a mask. As he grew a little older, he paid more attention to his surroundings. By doing this, he notices his father practicing swordsmanship and assumes that he is now in Europe. Since there clearly isn't something interesting to do for fun, he realizes that there are no computers in this world. The disappointment leads him to fall off a table and hit his head on the ground. Seeing this, Zenith rushes to him, worried that he had hurt himself. She uses her healing magic to make sure he doesn't feel any pain. This leaves him thrilled. He realizes that he is now in a world with regard for magic and swords. As he grows much older, he finds the only 3 books in the house and decides to read them. These books happen to be about magic. Curious to know more, he begins to apply what he reads by trying the incantations and spells in the book. In a short time, he realizes that he has the ability to use magic. The thrill of something new leads him to continue his practice, but in secret. One day, while practicing, he tries out an incantation which causes a large explosion, leaving a large hole in the house. Rushing to the place, they find out that he has been practicing magic, and his mother is very happy about this, since she believes that he is talented. Even though Paul had wanted Rudy to be more focused on swordsmanship since he was a boy, the two came to a conclusion that he could learn both. To help him with his magic, they decide to employ a tutor for him. When she arrives, they are surprised to see a slightly grown Powerpuff Girl. Rudy, on the other hand, is not impressed with how tiny her oranges are, but believes this is because she is young. The tutor introduces herself as Roxy, and after spending time with Rudy, she realizes that he has potential both in clapping and magic. Shortly after, Paul and Zenith throw a welcome party for Roxy, and she gets more comfortable with everyone. The next day, while playing with some dolls in the evening, Rudy instantly has a flashback of his accident in his previous life. The thought of this is interrupted by the loud happy noises his parents make while working out. The weirdo hopes that this encounter will give him a little sister, since he was already tired of the annoying little brothers he had in his past life, who had thrown him out on the streets some hours before he died. Just then he decides to prank his parents by interrupting their workout and asking them what they are doing, while hoping to hear the excuses they would try to come up with. When he comes out of his room, he sees Roxy fantasizing about her own workout session, and this causes him to halt his plan. He doesn't blame her for this, since he believes she is just growing. After 6 months under Roxy's tutoring, Rudy gets better in magic and progresses to intermediate level. During one of their night classes, Roxy reads a magic book to Rudy, who spends his time trying to get a glimpse of Roxy's floodgate. Meanwhile, Roxy reveals that she is a demon, which explains why his parents looked at her in a weird way when she first came. While she looked like a human, her hair color gave her away. She assures him that she isn't harmful and warns him not to go close to anyone with green hair, and a red gem on their forehead, as they are very harmful. On the other hand, Rudy compliments Roxy's hair and tells her he likes her, but she figures it would be child abuse to see any meaning in it. She tells him to keep the compliment for a girl he likes, and tell her if he feels the same way in 10 years. A year later, Rudy improves a lot in his magic but falls behind in his swordsmanship. Later that day, he watches the field and finds some children playing. When they turn to look at him, he immediately freaks out as this reminds him of the humiliation he had experienced in school in his past life. Meanwhile, seeing that Rudy has a lot of potential, Roxy recommends a school of magic called Rano University of Magic. While contemplating on this, Rudy becomes 5 years old and finds out that birthdays in this world are celebrated every 5 years. As a birthday gift, Paul gives him a sword. Zenith gives him a magic book and Roxy gives him a magic stone, while also announcing that his graduation exam would be held the next day. The following day, Roxy takes Rudy to a cozy spot where they can be alone. She performs a complex spell and instructs him to do the same, which ends up being far greater than she had ever seen. Passing this test made him a saint-level wearer mage. Since her work here is done, Roxy decides to leave the family. As much as Rudy's parents try to convince her, her mind had already been made up. She hands Rudy a charm from her hometown as a parting gift and hopes to see him again someday. In return, Rudy thanks her for helping him in various ways, and the two bid each other farewell. Days later, Rudy gets caught by Lilia with Roxy's underwear.
Yep.
He hoped she would keep this secret from his nosy parents. The next day, Rudy heads out to ask his parents for permission to go out and play. He clearly has been healed from his past life trauma, which stopped him from going out. Since this is the first time he is making such a request, his parents are pleased to let him go. Paul carries him on his neck, while advising him to use his powers only to protect the weak. Then, he sends Rudy off. For the first time since arriving in this new world, Rudy gets to see the village. He is thrilled at how beautiful it looks. Shortly after, he decides to read while being thankful for the arrival of Roxy in his life. While taking a walk, Rudy sees 3 boys bullying another and referring to him as a demon. At first, he chooses to mind his business, but upon realizing that the 3 boys will not stop, he steps up like a top G and yells at them to stop. However, they ignore him. This causes him to use his magic to fire water balls at them. In return, they try to throw stones at him, but he dodges their attack, leaving them with no option but to retreat. When Rudy approaches the boy, he discovers that he is a boy with green hair, which is almost identical to the kind of demons Roxy had told him to avoid. To confirm, he opts to check the boy's forehead and sees that the coast is clear. He helps the boy to dry his hair, while admiring how handsome he looks. When he asks about why the boy's hair is green, he reveals that his father is half-elf. Then he states that his name is Sylphie, and Rudy offers to be friends with him. Since Sylphie has witnessed Rudy's magic, he tells Rudy that he wants to learn magic, and Rudy is more than pleased to teach him. With night approaching, the two exchange goodbyes and head home to their parents. On getting home, Paul angrily questions Rudy about the boy he had fired the water ball at. Apparently, the boy had come with his parents and told Paul a completely different story, blaming Rudy for this. While Rudy tries to explain what happened to his father, Paul hits him in the face. When he eventually explains what happened, Paul feels very bad for not listening to him at first. The next day, while Rudy and Sylphie are playing in the fields, it suddenly starts to rain. Since they were closer to Rudy's house at that moment, he decides to take Sylphie home. On getting home, Rudy goes to have his bath and urges Sylphie to join him. He notices after taking his birth form that Sylphie refuses to do the same. This causes him to forcefully take Sylphie's clothes off. Shockingly, he realizes that Sylphie is a girl. Insert it was at this moment, Paul after being forced into a striptease, Sylphie begins to cry loudly. This gets the attention of Paul and Zenith, who rush to find them in this situation. Paul reveals that Sylphie's real name is actually Sylphiette, and urges his son to man up and apologize to Sylphie. Watching how Rudy does this, he wonders how his son could be as dumb as this. Eventually, Sylphie forgives him, leaving Paul in awe as to what he is teaching his son at such a young age. Months later, Zenith announces that she is pregnant and everyone is happy. Rudy, who had thought she would not be able to give birth to another child for some weird reason, is more excited. All the family celebrates this news with dinner. Lilia drops a bomb by revealing she is pregnant too. This shocks everyone to their bones since there could only be one culprit who could be the father, and that was Paul.
My disappointment. Yep.
On hearing this, Zenith is devastated. She thinks about what to do, while Paul sobs in a corner, disappointed in himself. When she asks Lilia what her plans for the baby are, she reveals that she intends to go back to her hometown after helping with her own child. Since Lilia has been so much help to Rudy, he doesn't want her to go. Therefore, he pleads with his mother to let her stay, claiming his father for making Lilia develop plot with him. Since he had planned out his statement well, Zenith listens to him and lets Lilia stay. Then she threatens to have a long conversation about this with Paul, who is now scared for his life. Contrary to Rudy's claim, Lilia was the one who seduced Paul by making him see how juicy her melons are. Since Rudy was the reason she remained in the house, she devotes herself to repaying his kindness. Months later, the babies are born and are named Norn and Aisha. Since the incident that night, Lilia and Rudy grew closer and started talking more often. He also had a discussion with his father, seeking to know what the unfaithful idiot cheated on his mother. In his defense, Paul expects Rudy to understand him as a man. He brings up the suggestion of school, leaving Rudy deep in thought. Later that day, Rudy tells Sylph about his decision to go to school, but she cries and pleads with him not to leave her. Days later, he receives a letter from Roxy, telling him about how she is doing and how her new student is so much like him, since he loved to peep at her floodgate. This causes him to be reminded of Roxy's suggestion that he tries out the University of Magic. That night, he brings this up to his father, asking that his father also allows Sylph to go with him and pay for her fees. When his father explains why this is not possible, Rudy asks that Paul get him a job so he can afford Sylph's fees. The next day, Paul receives a visitor, who happens to be a beast woman with beast-like cannons named Ghislaine. While Rudy still tries to figure out what is going on, Paul throws him into the field and the two do battle. As much as Rudy tries to use his magic powers to shield himself from his father's attacks, Paul's swordsmanship is unmatched, eventually leading him to knock Rudy out. When Rudy wakes up, he finds himself in a carriage, left to enjoy some alone time with the busy Ghislaine. When he introduces himself to her, she considers him to be too polite to be his father's son. Then, she reveals that he is now her little and that he will be working with her from now on. Since he was curious, Rudy asks Ghislaine if his father told her anything. She ignores his question and instead hands him a letter from his father, demanding that he reads it out loud since she cannot read. In the letter, his father reveals that he has gotten him a job to teach a 9-year-old girl named Ro. Also, Paul states that Rudy would be learning swordsmanship from Ghislaine, while she learns magic from him in return. His father had sent him far away for this job due to how overly dependent Sylph was on him. In the letter, Paul instructs him to get along with Ro, but keep his pervy sights off Ghislaine. On hearing this, Ghislaine demands that Rudy send the letter to Zenith. When they arrive at Ro's house, they see that it is an incredibly huge mansion, with beast people as servants. Shortly after, a man comes out and educates Rudy on how to greet like a noble, after seeing how badly he was at it. He introduces himself as Philip, who happens to be Paul's cousin. After their introduction, Philip leads Rudy to meet his daughter Eris. Seeing him, she is pissed because he is younger than her. When Rudy tries to let her know that he knows more than her, she leaves a mark of her hand on his face. Rudy returns the favor immediately, leading to a brief battle of supremacy between the two youngsters. Fortunately, he is able to escape his angry wife and goes to meet Philip. Philip expects that he would give up after seeing how rude the girl is, but he is determined to win her over. He figures out a plan to make Eris study, and Philip offers to help. While the two are in a place where they are supposed to study, a man arrives and begins to beat them up. Rudy assumes that this is just a test, but soon figures out how real this is when he sees how much the man had made Eris bleed. When he leaves, Rudy heals Eris and tries to figure out a way to escape the men. At this point, Eris is still weak, and she begs him to help her. Seeing this as an opportunity, Rudy makes Eris promise not to be violent towards him anymore. After she makes the promise, Rudy helps her out and they are able to escape. He heals her completely, and since she now has her strength back, she switches to her violent ways. In a brief moment, she hears the voice of her kidnappers and runs to meet Rudy. Fortunately, they find their way back to the mansion. On their way back, Eris relieves the experience of being kidnapped, as she gets taken away again. This time, Rudy runs after them and uses his powers against the men. When one of the men attempts to finish them off with a sword technique, Ghislaine appears and sends them all to the underworld in one slash. When they return home, Rudy believes he has failed as Eris' teacher since he wasn't able to protect her, but she thinks otherwise. Eris tells him that she has accepted him and gives him permission to call her by her name. Upon hearing this, Rudy is excited. He is pleased to have landed his first ever job, and not be the useless idiot he knows he is. The next day, Rudy apologizes to Philip for what had happened to Eris, claiming it was his fault. He seeks to know what the men wanted Eris for. In response, Philip reveals that the men had probably intended to use Eris for political or physical gains. While they talk, a woman walks in, and Rudy figures she would be Philip's wife. He tries to greet her, but she snubs him. Just then, another man walks in. When Rudy greets him, the man thinks Rudy is too polite to be Paul's son. This man happens to be Soros, Philip's father, and the leaders of Fito. He beats Philip up for not appreciating Rudy enough for saving his daughter. Seeing him act up, Rudy figures Eris definitely got her rusty character from the rusty old man. Soros had come to ask Rudy to teach Eris magic, but he believes Eris should be able to do so herself. Soros agrees and calls Eris loudly. When she arrives, she expects that he would have sealed the deal, but is shocked when he tells her to ask Rudy herself. Since she didn't want to ask him plainly, she decides to do it the beast way, which Rudy finds very confusing. At that moment, the butler explains that she is only imitating the dropping hair pose of the beast people when asking for something politely. Realizing this, he accepts. Days later, Rudy begins to tutor Eris. While doing so, he gets swordsmanship lessons from Ghislaine and teaches her how to count and read in return. Meanwhile, Eris tries a fire-emitting spell, hoping to be able to make huge fireworks like him. As much as Rudy would love this, he hopes she would be more enthusiastic about reading and writing. A month of teaching passes by, and Eris pays less attention to her training. One day, Rudy finds her sleeping in a barn. Being a direct descendant of the pervy Paul, he decides to check the size of her balloons and ends up trying to have a clear view of her floodgate. Just as he is about to succeed, Eris wakes up. She punches him and beats him up. To redeem himself, Rudy plots with Ghislaine to tell Eris how he was able to help her learn to read and write. While Ghislaine narrates her ordeal, Eris reconsiders having Rudy as her tutor. Later that day, Rudy heads into the city with the two b****s. He uses the prices of things to teach the girls some calculations. On their way back, they inform Rudy about the flying dragon home. Since this sounds interesting, he hopes to go there one day. As the days go by, Eris becomes better with her studies. In appreciation, she gives Rudy a medicine, which one trader had tried to make him buy the day before. He sees this as a good gift for his father, and she reveals that she used part of her allowance to get it for him. When she asks him what it is used for, he avoids the question. Just then, the medicine splits and calls out the name aphrodisiac, making Eris wonder what the word means. While they train, Ghislaine seems very optimistic that she would increase her rank, considering how much effort she is putting into training. Meanwhile, Rudy finally finishes the statue he was sculpting. While taking a look at it, he hears a knock on the door. Going to see who it is, he realizes that it is Edna. She tells him that Eris's birthday is coming soon, and Rudy thinks that this is a chance to give Eris a good time. Later on, he follows Philip to the library since he wishes to learn other languages. When Philip notices that Rudy has picked a book in beast language, he seizes the opportunity to tell him about the benefits of studying the language, one of which is unlimited access to freaky beast girls. Since Rudy had wanted to study many languages, Philip grants him permission to borrow as many books as he wants. While trying to study, he hears a loud noise outside. Looking there, he realizes that it is Eris. Apparently, she finds it hard to learn how to dance. Due to this, Rudy goes to her, promising to help her out. After much thought, Eris listens to him and thanks him with a knock in the head. Then, she tells him to follow her, while the two resume her dance practice. While they crack eyes, Rudy realizes that she is moving too fast and dancing like an idiot. When he points this out to her, she swings him across the room like a worthless piece of rag. Days later, he gets another letter from Roxy, which he is pleased with. Meanwhile, the day of Eris's birthday party is here, and she is made to dance with a random ass boy. When she begins to go as fast like she always does, the two fall down, making everyone laugh at her. Rudy steps up like a prince, charming to help a damsel in distress. He offers to dance with her in the way that they have practiced. This time, she impresses the audience and is pleased. Watching them, Edna is surprised and seeks to know how he was able to do this. In the meantime, the other girls at the party rush over to Rudy, seeking to know how old he is and if he is free for clapping later. That night, they go to bed and Rudy wakes up to realize that Eris had slept off beside him. He attempts to feel her juicy melons, but she notices this and walks out. Just then, he discovers that some people are working out in a tower and decides to have a look. Shockingly, they are Soros and a sexy freaky beast maid. Meanwhile, Rudy realizes he finds studying other languages more fun than studying English in his previous life. Then he decides to go watch Eris train, where he finds out that she has reached an advanced rank through her training. Later that day, while coming out of the house, Rudy sees Eris and some maids talking about him and trying to carry something into the kitchen, which they obviously do not want him to see. Seeing this, he decides to sneak into the kitchen to see what they are hiding. Eavesdropping on their conversations, Rudy finds out they are planning something for his upcoming birthday, which surprises him and he leaves the place. The next day in his room, Rudy notices that everyone seems to be busy, while Ghislaine is in his room too, trying to keep his company by telling him how proud she is that he has successfully learned 2 languages in 2 years. Soon, Rudy tells her he is hungry and would like to grab some snacks, but at that moment, Ghislaine quickly blocks the door and tells him they should talk more. Seeing this, Rudy realizes the day is the D-Day and decides to play along by showing a sculpture she made of her with her tail missing. Knowing she would do anything to keep him indoors, his perverted self tells Ghislaine to show him her round-ass and the base of her tail to finish his sculpture, which she did without hesitation. While being jerked by touching her strong backside, a maid suddenly comes in to inform him of dinner and sees them. Meanwhile, this happens to be a way to call Rudy to the hall where he is surprised with a birthday party and begins to cry, even though he already knows of the plan. There, everyone begins to feel bad for him because his parents are unable to attend his 10th birthday because of the monsters acting up and being shit. Suddenly, Eris' mother comes to hug him, even though everyone knows she hates him. Surprisingly, she promises to adopt and also asks him to marry Eris, which makes the guards drag her for creating a scene. At that moment, Eris instructs Rudy to be given a gift, which happens to be an expensive-looking staff, since a great mage, and it is weird he does not have a staff. Then she commands that the party begins, and everyone gets to have lots of fun. At night, after the party, Rudy gets to talk with Philip, who tells him about what happens in the Boreas family, and he also wants Rudy to marry Eris and take over the succession of the family. To do this, he tells Rudy he would leave Eris with her tied in his bed tonight. But Rudy decides to ignore the offer by saying he needs to go to bed. On his way, Rudy begins to regret his decision of declining Philip's offer, as he would have had the opportunity to get his own maids. However, getting to his room, he finds Eris there and knows it must be Philip's plan. Seeing her, he begins to think of how his first time with her is going to be by trying to touch her floodgate, but stops instantly. But then, she tells him she would accept anything he wants as long as it is just a little. Unfortunately for him, he decides to take his decision by making advances to have a nice time with her, which gets her angry and makes her beat him, leaving him on the ground as she storms out. Soon, she comes back to apologize for her actions and tells him to wait another 5 years, become a proper adult, before they can do whatever they want. Hearing this, Rudy becomes very excited about Eris' promise and can't wait for 5 years to come. Meanwhile, Rudy's father is on his way trying to go for his son's birthday, but keeps getting attacked by monsters. Days later, Rudy, Eris, and Ghislaine decide to go far away from the city for Rudy to cast spells. Suddenly, Rudy notices a cloud gathering with lots of mana, which catches the attention of some town leaders, who send people to go find the location and kill anyone. While still wondering where the mana is from, they are suddenly attacked by Almanfi, the strongest Pelagius servant, but Ghislaine is able to block all his attacks after seeing that Rudy is his sim. There he reveals his mission to kill whoever is responsible for the mana. Suddenly, while they talk, the mana energy explodes from the sky and consumes them, even when they try to run away. After this incident, Rudy wakes up to find himself in a place that seems like heaven in his old body, and meets with an all-white goofy-like person, who introduces himself as the man-god. There, the man-god tells him that his physical body is okay, while he is in his mental form right now. While talking, the man-god tells him he is going to die due to how harsh the demon continent is, and he is caught up in a massive mana disaster, which transported him all the way across the world to the demon continent. Hearing this, Rudy is shocked as he remembers the light that consumed him and his friends, referring to the light that he got dragged into, and he asks him what he can do. However, he asks what he can do to help himself, and the man-god tells him that by the time he wakes up, there will be a man nearby who he must rely on and also help. Suddenly, Rudy wakes up from his dream in his normal self, and sees that he is back to his normal form with Eris still sleeping by his side. While trying to look around for Ghislaine, he suddenly sees a man behind a fire, whom he recognizes as a Superd, and tries to attack out of fear. But then, seeing how unbothered the man is, Rudy approaches him to introduce himself since he can speak demon language. There, the man named Ruchard tells him he and Eris fell from the sky and he made them fire to keep them from the cold. Then Rudy proceeds to ask where they are, to which the man says they are in the demon continent, which surprises him, and they begin to have conversations. Suddenly, Eris wakes up from her sleep and is frightened on seeing Ruchard, as she begins to cry and shout. Seeing this, Ruchard tells Rudy that Eris' reaction is normal, as everyone believes he is dangerous, but Rudy is very different. Soon, Ruchard tries to be nice to Eris by building trust between them. Then he asks if they can become friends, which she agrees to, and they become close friends. Then, Rudy begins to think of how to make sure he gets Eris home. The following morning, they go up to a mountain where they see the demon continent's vast land, which Eris excitedly sees as the start of an adventure, and begin their journey. After stopping to rest for a while, Rudy and Eris get to see Ruchard kill a monster, and Eris begins to ask how he knew the monster was there as they continue their journey. There he replies to her by saying he can see the monsters with the eye in his forehead, which he has always wished he did not have. Shortly after, they arrive at the Migard tribe village where a boy named Rowan refuses to let Ruby and Eris in. Eventually, Ruchard gets to convince him, which makes him decide to call the chief, whom Ruchard says will let them in once they talk. Soon, the chief arrives and Rudy greets him, which makes him appreciate his politeness and the fact that he can speak demon language. But then the chief notices the pendant on Rudy's neck and asks where he got it, which he says is from his master Roxy. Hearing this, everyone is surprised as this place happens to be Roxy's hometown, and the man, who happens to follow the chief, says Roxy is his daughter's name. While taking Rudy around the village, Roxy's father asks if his daughter is safe and where she is. Rudy tells him she is okay, and her letter state is in Shuron Kingdom, which makes him happy on hearing that his daughter is fine. At night after dinner, and while Rudy puts Eris to sleep, the chief asks how they will get home, to which Ruchard says he will go with them to protect them and have them get home safe. Then, the chief begins to talk about Ruchard's tribe reputation, which makes Rudy ask what happened that made everyone think that Ruchard's tribe is dangerous. Then, Ruchard gets to tell him about the dark side of his tribe that happened a long time ago, which surprises him. After being told the tragic story, Rudy promises to help him restore his tribe's reputation. The next while they are about to leave, Roxy's parents decide to bid them farewell by giving Rudy gifts as a reward for letting them know that their daughter is safe. Then, they continue on their journey as Rudy tells Ruchard he looks forward to traveling with him. On their way, they encounter some monsters, which Eris is able to destroy in a jiffy with the sword given to her, and Rudy tells her that she could have left it to them. Soon at night, they begin to eat, but only Rudy is able to have the beef of the monster she kills, which makes Rudy cry inside himself that he needs to eat rice and beef. However, they continue on their journey to Ricarisu the next day, where they see the entry gate heavily guarded by demons, and overhears them talking about the outlaw and criminal dead end, which Ruchard says is one of the names he is known by. Seeing this, they begin to wonder how to get Ruchard past the gate. At that moment, Rudy sees a jelly paint and comes up with an idea of painting Ruchard's initial green hair to blue. Successful, they are able to pass through and are amazed to see the beautiful city behind the gate. Walking around, Rudy believes there is an adventurers guild in the city for them to make some money and head there. Getting to the adventurers guild, Rudy comes up with a plan to test if the adventurers would recognize Ruchard, but they do not, as they begin to laugh at him. Seeing this, Rudy believes that his disguise plan worked. Then they proceed to sign up for the adventurers guild, where they realize they cannot be given certain jobs, as they have not gotten to the required rank. There, one of the adventurers approaches Rudy and tells him to take the job of looking for a lost kitten, which gets him angry, and they leave the guild. On their way, Eris begins to ask why he did not take any job, as she is eager to slay a dragon. After walking around the city, they decide to rest for the day, which makes Rudy rent a room in an inn for them, as they would be busy as from the following day. At that moment, some adventurers come into the inn and a girl among them asks Eris to eat with them since they are all new adventurers. However, Eris decides to ignore her, but it leads to her mistakenly spoiling the button of the clothes Rudy gave her, which makes her beat the girl up. Seeing this, Rudy immediately stops her and helps heal the adventurer named Kurt. Later that night, while Rudy sleeps, he finds himself with the man god again, who tells him to take the job of finding the lost kitten, as it will be a way to put an end to his worries. Suddenly, at that moment, he wakes up from his dream and sees Eris awake too and goes to sit with her. There he finds out she is worried about whether they would make it home, which makes Rudy assure her they will. The next day, they set out in search of the lost kitten, and with Rogers' help, they are able to locate a cave where they see a huge cat, which is supposed to be the kitten. Seeing this, Rudy realizes that everything seems bigger in the demon continent.
That's what she said!
Suddenly, the criminals that kidnapped the animals to get money arrive in the cave, which makes Rudy and the others hide in the dark and are able to have the criminals trapped with spells. However, while trying to ask the criminals a question, Rudy gets kicked off by one of them. Seeing this, Richard becomes angry and cuts off the criminal's head, shocking everyone. Shocked at Richard's action, Rudy asks why he did that, and he replies it is because the criminal is evil for hurting a child. Hearing this, Rudy tells him not to kill anyone again. Then he asks the two other criminals, who happen to be adventurers of their ranks, and tells them to join his team so as to spare their lives. Hearing this, Richard becomes furious and asks why Rudy would want to team up with villains, which he said is a good idea for them to get good jobs. However, Richard insists on not working with the bad ones, which makes Eris begin to hit him as she talks to them about how Rudy is doing all this for their sake, until Rudy tells her to stop talking. Eventually, Richard decides to succumb to the idea. The following day outside the guild, Rudy trades jobs with the bad adventurers and asks them to spread the name, Dead End, and make it sound good by telling how good they behave. On getting to Rudy's village, Roxy sees how the village seems to be in a ruined state, which makes her quickly check the list of dead people. Fortunately, neither his name nor his family's names are there, which makes her calm. Then she sees a letter written by Paul to Roxy about what is happening. At that moment, she hears some people mentioning Paul in their conversations, which makes her approach them to ask if they know him. On the other hand, Rudy gets to receive a new task from the guild to investigate a mysterious monster, which Eris is happy about, and Richard mentions that if they slay the monster, they won't have to worry about money for a while. Getting to the forest, they realize that the same job has been given to two other teams. Seeing that the other adventurers do not want to share the rewards with them, Rudy also decides that they do first come, first serve. But then, Richard stops and tells them they have to help the other adventurers when they are in danger, which Rudy and Eris accept. Soon monsters begin to attack the adventurers, but Rudy tells Richard to wait a little longer for the adventurers to appreciate the rescue, so they can boost their reputation. But then, Rudy's plan seems to be the worst so far, as one of the adventurers ends up being killed by the monster's attack, which makes Richard and Eris quickly go save the others by killing the monsters. However, Richard is angry and goes to ask Rudy, who is now feeling bad about his decision, why he stopped them, as they could have saved the adventurer. But Kurt, one of the saved adventurers, goes to stop Richard to stop blaming Rudy. Soon, the adventurers leave the forest and proceed to carry out their task until suddenly they hear fight noises. Hearing this, they quickly hurry to the scene to see what is happening, but see dead adventurers who were attacked by a redwood cobra, which makes them wonder how the cobra got to this type of forest. Seeing this, Rudy decides that they stop the monster and save the adventurer in its mouth, which makes Eris tell them that her sword cannot affect the cobra, but yet they begin to battle the monster to save the adventurer. Fortunately, they are able to kill the cobra, but too late to save the adventurer, who ended up dead. On their way back to the city, they meet with an adventurer who does not like them, and he reveals that he knows they have been trading jobs with Jaleel and Visco. Shocked at this discovery, Rudy asks what he wants, and the greedy adventurer demands half of their monthly earnings for him to keep mute and not have their license taken from them. Hearing this, Rudy begins to think of what he has to do because they need money and must get Eris back home. Suddenly at that moment, Richard pours water on his head to wash off the coloring in his hair and reveals his true identity, which scares everyone off. Then he moves to lift the bad adventurer and warn him that their licenses must not be revoked, as they are leaving the city already. Suddenly, the city soldiers arrive to take him down, and he immediately escapes by jumping off. Leaving the city, Rudy and Eris go to find him. On seeing him, Rudy apologizes for being more concerned about making money and improving his Richard reputation, which Richard forgives him for anyways. The next day, Rudy and Eris wake up to see a dried land on Richard's head, as he has decided to shave his hair because it scares people, which they begin to laugh about. Then Rudy, while about to continue on their journey, decides that they talk about whatever decision they are to make, which at that moment makes them begin their first dead-end strategy meeting as they head to Azure Kingdom.